Please pray with me. May these words that I speak be grounded in my soul, encouraged by the God presence in me, and may these words that you hear be captured by your soul, enlivened by the God presence in you. Amen. So what are we to make of Martha and Mary and Jesus in this story? What was Luke trying to say by including such a countercultural story in his gospel? As Jeanette mentioned in the preamble to the reading, this particular story has endured a variety of interpretations, but it seems to me that the most common interpretations do not consider the first century culture deeply enough. The real danger of interpreting these ancient stories through modern eyes is that we often miss completely the intended message of the story. I believe, for the Gospels particularly, that every bit of story has a purpose and a reason for being included as part of Jesus' life and ministry, even though the stories vary from one writer to the other and are used to give different impressions. And so, although I see nothing wrong with choosing to have this story give us wisdom in understanding something from our own culture, I am more curious about why Luke would include this particular story and how Jesus was experienced that made it important to write down this story, whether it actually happened or not. I see at least three clear challenges to the cultural norms of Jesus' world. The first challenge is in referring to the location as Martha's home. This might not seem important, except, as Jeanette said, that women could not own property. This was not her home. Now, we might just decide that Luke is simply making this reference to name the principal character in the story, but if that was the case, then why wouldn't he name Mary as well? Also, Luke has already made reference to 4 other homes in previous chapters: Simon's home, the Pharisee's home, the centurion's home, and the home of Jairus, all men. For me, it suggests an importance to the women being central characters in this story. The second cultural challenge is that Jesus appears to be alone in this house with these 2 women who are not relatives. Women were never, ever to be in the company of men without a male member of their family present. And yet Jesus seems to be completely comfortable in their company. Now, perhaps there were other men there, Mary and Martha's brother Lazarus, or some of the other disciples, which simply have not been named. But that strikes me as quite odd in a book that names the men always and rarely names the women, that the women would be named if the men were actually there. But either way, and if the men were there, then there's another cultural taboo that has been broken, because that means that Mary is sitting amongst the men in their part of the house, which was also strictly forbidden. So either way, Luke or Jesus is challenging the societal norms around the interaction of men and women. The third and most obvious challenge to the culture is that Jesus is teaching a woman intentionally. There is no doubt that there would have been women in the crowds at the many different places where Jesus taught publicly, but in this story he is teaching a woman one-on-one in the privacy of her home. The further twist to this is that Martha isn't upset about Jesus teaching Mary. She makes no comment about Jesus teaching Mary. Martha's upset because she's been left to do all the work prescribed to her by her gender in the home. You see, all of this is going on in these 5 little verses of this tiny story. There is no question that when told back in the first century, this would have been provocative, even scandalous. So why? Why is this story recorded? It was included, I believe, because within these new Christian communities, men and women living and eating and learning together was the new norm. This was normal. It was included because this is what Jesus taught them and modeled for them. Certainly it would have been an outrage in the wider community, but for these new Christians, this was just one more way of standing against the injustices of the political and religious authorities. I think we have made way too much of the whole gender role or faith versus works interpretations of this story. I believe the key to this story is in Jesus' response to Martha. Jesus is like a teacher to a student. Martha, Martha, how many times have we talked about this? You are distracted by many things while there is need for only one thing. Don't just do something, sit there. Jesus is calling Martha to sit and to breathe and to find her soul, her connection to God. And I think the reason this story is about women doing this is twofold. First, it suggests that Jesus believed women were just as capable as men of learning, and through contemplation and reflection would gain wisdom. And second, it suggests that although the men in this culture were supposed to be able to learn, and through contemplation and reflection gain wisdom, that Jesus didn't think they'd done a very good job of that. And we see that repeated in his teachings with the disciples, where he gets so frustrated that they just don't seem to get it. He is saying to everyone, don't just do something, sit there. Not forever, just long enough to gain the wisdom to do the right work the right way, God's way. So what does this mean for us? Good Protestants have tended to focus on right belief. We need to believe the right things. And on good works as the way of directing the Christian life. We have never been very good at contemplation, reflection, meditation, and the like. But I believe Jesus is challenging us to sit and take the time to ground ourselves deeply in the Spirit of God, and from that place, determine what it is we need to do. After all, Jesus regularly went away to pray, to reflect, to contemplate, to sit. My own workday nearly always begins. Am I back? Nearly always begins with a combination of meditation, prayer, and reading that it lasts up to about an hour. And I started that many, many years ago after reading one of Bishop John Spong's books, where he casually mentions in there that the first 4 hours of every day he spends in prayer. And I thought, if he can do 4 hours, I can do 15 minutes. And I've built it since then. This is how I ground my spirit and restore my soul before moving into the tasks of the day. This has served me well, allowed me to be open to for the most part to whatever comes along, and ensures that I don't end up just doing a whole lot of things that don't really add any value to my life or to yours. Unfortunately, though, I'm not perfect. And maybe that's a good thing. My personal life does not always go so smoothly. I have great difficulty sitting at home. I become consumed by tasks and lists. I need everything to be perfect, everything to be in order before I can sit. When I am done, I sit, and within minutes, seconds sometimes, I see something else that needs to be done, and I'm off again. Perhaps some of you see yourself in this, and perhaps others of you do this sitting much better than I do. My partner certainly does. But for me, I realize that I really, really do need to sit there and stay there until I can come to the same grounded spirit and restored soul that I have come to appreciate in my work life. I know I missed a lot of God moments with my grandchildren last week because I was too often overcome with the disorder and chaos that is simply part of that life. And so, I wonder what Martha did next in this story. If she were me, she likely huffed off back to the kitchen, frustrated, but determined to get it all done and to keep her home perfect and immaculate and put that perfect meal on the table. Perhaps even cursing Mary and Jesus a little under her breath. However, I would like to believe that she took off her apron and sat down. Really sat down. Because that is what I need to do. That is what we all need to do. As for dinner, maybe they just ordered pizza.